So if fire suppression makes fires worse, then why do we do it? Well, wildfires are big business. And cousin, business is a boomin'. When you hear that the California wildfires cost billions of dollars, it's not like they just burned a stack of money. That money went somewhere. Every helicopter in the sky costs a lot of money. In fact, it's around 10 grand an hour. And the air tankers are even more. Every retardant drop from a VLAT costs north of $65,000 per bust. And they drop that shit like the expiration date is tomorrow. The Forest Service spends nearly $100 million a year on retardant. And it all goes to one private company. Fire aviation costs millions of dollars every day in peak fire season, and many of the ships are contracted out by private companies. They even have a 747. Thousands of miles of hose get used up every year. In 2020, they had a nationwide fire hose shortage. Every lunch, every Gatorade, marked up to government cost. The California Department of Corrections has a great racket. They use cheap prison labor to manufacture their equipment, but they bill at government cost. Why? Well, why not? It's not their money. It's yours. And it's not just the suppression costs. Destruction means transactions. How much money does a hardware store make off your house if it's just sitting there year after year? Well, how much money do you think they make when it burns to the ground? You think the car salesmen are distraught that they have to sell thousands of brand new cars every year because the ones they just sold you all burned up in a wildfire? Every burned out car means a new one is sold. Every leveled house means a new one is built. Contractors, labor, permits, building supplies, furniture, wiring, utilities. Every power pole has to be replaced by men working overtime with hazard pay. The wildfire industrial complex is a $12 billion a year industry in California alone. That's bigger than porn. And in a way, it is porn. Media clowns flock to wildfires like moths to a flame. They plant themselves in front of a raging headfire for the cool shot, and then have to run for their lives when it outflanks them. They overhype the intensity of the incidents for their fire porn, staging shots to heighten the drama for their unsuspecting viewers, doing multiple takes to get the ominous tone just right. Oftentimes, you'll find more fire pornographers than firefighters. And they cheer when homes burn up, and are visibly disappointed when a neighborhood is saved. They really only profit when your life has been destroyed on camera. Sometimes the firefighters like to tease the pornographers by pretending to do some hotlining, to trick them into racing over and raising their cameras. Talking heads with all the gravitas of an underwear model will cry out loud that everything you are seeing is unprecedented. It's not. There is no new kind of magical fire behavior that didn't exist before.
We'll do it live. Okay. Oh. No. We'll do it live! Fuck it. Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! Thing sucks!
Welcome. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Man on Fire. Today is an interesting day. I'm going to try to keep it together. We've got lots of stuff going on. We've got evidence that the prescribed fire funds in California, is it just a big money laundering scheme? Now, I raised this question last night, and I thought, someone's going to prove me wrong, or this is going to be really, really difficult to dig into. Turns out that's not the case. Literally, the first stone that we overturned, we found something that I think you guys are going to be surprised by, to say the least. And that's just the beginning. We're going to get into that. We have heroes in our midst. Did Chinese camp have to burn down? And do we have adults actually back in charge in DC? Now, we also have some breaking fire news. We've got Fire Photo Girl is on scene of the Pyrite fire down in Riverside. And this is having a little trouble loading. Let's just have a look. I don't know what to make of this. There was a little bit of a hullabaloo raised because there were some hikers at the top of the hill, and they were going to be extracted by helicopter. Got some decent fire activity on this thing. We can just peer in on this and see what's happening. I don't know if this audio comes in for you guys, but she's right off of Sierra. It's like a little bit north of Armstrong. It's like the Fontana side near Europa. Doesn't seem like anything crazy is going on. They're trying to hold this road. I don't know what's going on with this connection. Let's see if we can refresh it real quick. All right, now we're back live. Let's see what's going on. Yeah, this is kind of moderate. That's moderate fire behavior. Nothing too crazy. So she's going to sign off here in a second, and she'll come back in a bit because it's not too crazy. You know, that's some decent fire behavior right there. Look at that. Does this work? I don't know if it works when we go full screen. She's going to put us down on the ground because she's got something worth filming. Now, just so you know, Fire Photo Girl is awesome. She's great. I've worked with her quite a bit. Just in that, like, we've run into each other so many times on the fire line, helped each other out. She's a real one. She used to work for CAL FIRE, so she understands this stuff better than your average stringer. So she's always in there with the right PPE. She understands tactics. She doesn't get in the way. She represents these people really nicely. So make sure you are subscribed to her and following her live streams. We have drawn on her live stream from the Palisades fire countless times because there's so much value in having this live on the ground look from these wildfires. The most common conflict that we have with just interfacing with public understanding of wildfires is people don't know what it's like on the actual fires. And so having this kind of unfiltered perspective, especially from somebody who's, you know, actually knows where to go and knows where these things are going and understand what they're looking at, like Brandy does, it's super valuable. And this becomes great evidence, especially when we're trying to go back and understand what happened. So this stuff is totally invaluable. Make sure you're following her. Now, yesterday, we touched on the issue of PFAS chemicals, these forever chemicals that are in the Nomex of these firefighters, that they're wearing all the time. They are sweating into it. These chemicals are leaching into their bodies and giving them cancer. Now, we have Diane Cotter, who reached out to me and called attention to this flick, this documentary that I was aware of, but I hadn't seen it. So when I made Hot Shot, I kind of cloistered myself where I was like, I'm not going to watch any fire movies, any fire documentaries at all, because I don't want, you know, what I'm doing to be tainted or changed. I don't want to have any insight into what else is happening. But I watched this today because she reached out to me. So Diane's husband developed cancer, and she had the sneaking suspicion that it could have been something in their equipment. And she was kind of like the OG whistleblower to raise awareness about the fact that the clothes that these guys are wearing is killing them. There's Diane. I highly recommend you guys watch this. It's called Burned. You can watch it on YouTube. It's full of New England accents. So it's awesome. Guys, this demands our attention. And there are people who are, again, they're trying to get everything switched over to wool clothing, which I think would be a good idea. But if it weren't for Diane, like doing the hard work on this stuff, it's like the amount of negligence surrounding this issue is absolutely insane. You guys should watch this doc to have an understanding of how this all went down and how is it that she just with her internet connection figured out what all of the oversight committees, all of the labor unions should have been dealing with, but weren't. It's kind of insane. So this is just a reminder that not all heroes wear capes. Not all heroes wear Nomex. Some heroes are massholes. And I say that with love. But anyway, go watch this flick. It's called Burned, Protecting the Protectors. I think it's great. And Mark Ruffalo's got a little appearance on the end of it. Now, what else do we have today? Governor Newsom is on his bullshit, at least the blue-haired intern running his press account. Look at this tweet. Just in, as Trump cuts the U.S. Forest Service, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced today that California is joining the Northwest Wildland Firefighting Compact with Canadian governments and other U.S. states to keep our residents safe. Yeah, because Gavin has such a great track record of keeping residents safe from wildfires. That's exactly who you want on your kickball team of protecting residents from wildfires, is the dude with literally the worst wildfire record in the history of humanity. The worst. Like, there's nobody even close. He has the worst stewardship of any state in fire country in the history of the universe. Now, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? First off, I just need to address this first line. As Trump cuts the U.S. Forest Service, this is such disingenuous bullshit coming from such disingenuous bullshit artists. Trump is not cutting the U.S. Forest Service. What he's doing is he is establishing a new agency. I call it FedFire. They're going to call it the National Wildfire Service. I think that's lame. They should call it FedFire. But anyway, they are consolidating firefighting responsibilities into a new agency. They are getting a clean slate because the Forest Service has sucked with taking care of their firefighters and with organizational capabilities. The responsibilities of the U.S. Forest Service have shifted so much. They have to do so much more in terms of protecting lives and structures that's normally not their purview. So it makes the most sense to remove firefighting responsibilities from the Forest Service. They're going to continue using the same people, the same ranger stations, the same fire engines. They might paint them a different color. They might not. Now, Gavin is announcing this because guess what? We're going to be standing up this agency. At least we're going to be outlining what this new agency is going to be in the next 2 weeks. And so Gavin is trying to preempt this with some performative bullshit that actually doesn't mean anything. And when you see the press release about this, they talk about how climate change is the reason for this. Climate change, of course, has nothing to do with fire suppression, has nothing to do with poor forest management. It's just climate change, as always. I keep telling you guys, they are always going to use this as their get out of jail free card because they never want you to look at an incident like the Palisades fire, where this scumbag refused to clear any vegetation from Topanga State Park that surrounded this neighborhood and then burned it to the ground. Okay? So it's nothing but performative bullshit. And as we're going to get into later, it's more than that. It's money laundering. It's money laundering. Now, there was another thing. You remember we covered this article. It's a rare W by the LA Times. This was a rare W by the LA Times. What was it? Noah, man, what was the last name? I know they mentioned it somewhere in here. Dang it. I'm so sorry. I forgot his last name. Dude's first name is Noah. Noah Haggerty, that's what it is. So he wrote this excellent article for the LA Times that didn't get bogged down with climate, that usual cult-like tick that they have, where they have to say due to climate change after every sentence, just to make sure it's like their, praise be to Zog tick that they have to put after everything because it's a fucking cult. But Noah Haggerty had this great article where he talks about the plain reality of forest stewardship and our perception of the wilds and the wilderness. Our perception that somehow the Native Americans had this totally natural integration into the lands when they didn't. They had a very heavy hand. They were putting fire on the ground every single year and like thousands of times a year. So they genuinely manipulated their environment. It wasn't just this untouched, don't touch anything kind of policy. And unfortunately, the John Muir policy, and this is the John Muir project that's like clapping back at Noah and his article, which was like, dude, I had no notes on his article. It was like flawless. But of course, they're going to clap back because he's calling into question the philosophy of John Muir, which is we can't touch this. We cannot touch this. This is nature. We have to let nature do nature. Okay, this is very misguided. Now, they tried to attack this. And look, some of the points that they make are decent. Look, read it if you want to. This was sent to me by Sue Thompson, the great Sue Thompson. And I told her that I think it dropped my IQ 10 points reading this for a variety of reasons. Now, they're saying the wildfire crisis wasn't born from preserving wilderness. Science shows it stems from climate change. Okay, that right there is an immediate red flag. Anyone who tells you that the wildfire issue out west is because of climate change, you can immediately disregard everything they're going to say. I'm sorry. I'm not here to debate climate change. Yes, it's an issue. It is such a microscopic issue. It's so stupid that they keep pretending like CO2 is the control knob for the forest fires out west, when you can see the density of the fuels out there is so absurd. This gets worse. Their rebuttal gets worse. It comes from climate change, the sprawling development in high-risk areas. That is a factor, absolutely. and human disruption of natural fire conditions through different wildfire mitigation efforts. Now, here, what they're trying to do, the disruption of natural fire conditions, now, again, they're going to lump in what the natives had, which was not natural. It's a heavy, heavy human hand on the environment. But what they're really talking about is fire suppression. And yes, this absolutely has a huge impact on the fires. Fire suppression creates bigger fires. We know this. But see how they're calling it wildfire mitigation? They're trying to lump that in. They always do this thing where they're going to conflate it with something that's, yeah, it's pretty much true. But now wildfire mitigation, like removing fuels, is not the same thing as wildfire suppression. In fact, it's like basically the opposite, right? One is preserving the amount of fuels on the ground. That's bad. The other is getting rid of them. And importantly, fire suppression was never synonymous with protecting wilderness. Quite the opposite. Really? Wilderness is where fire is most often allowed to serve its ecological role without interference from agencies. Okay, I like that. While Haggerty claims that virtually all the ecologists, fire scientists, and indigenous fire protectioners you spoke with agree that this myth created our growing wildfire crisis in California, it is true. This overgeneralizes and implies a consensus that does not reflect the breadth of independent, peer-reviewed, even Forest Service science on forest density, wildfire behavior, and management outcomes. Now, what they tried to claim is that the more dense your forest, the less likely it is to burn, and the lower the severity. Can you believe that? They tried to claim this. Now, they go on to say that research consistently shows that logging can make fires burn hotter and faster while degrading biodiversity, water security, and carbon storage. Look, a part of this is true, okay? Part of this is true that logging slash actually does tend to create big wildfires. So you have to be very judicious. And if you're going to do logging, you have to follow up with prescribed fire to clean it up. You have to. And if you don't do that, then yeah, they are right about this. You got to be very careful with not just logging, but just any kind of manual thinning of an area. If you don't clean it out with prescribed fire, you are setting yourself up for a pretty catastrophic fire, even if you've gotten rid of some of the bulk. Now, this idea, again, they're talking about carbon storage. Like this is the control knob for wildfires. It's so stupid. If you actually want to sequester carbon, you got to cut down the trees, right? The only way to sequester carbon is to cut down that tree, turn it into 2x4s, and put it in a home. Now, don't put it in a home that's nearby any of Gavin Newsom's property, because then it's going to burn down and then you're releasing it. But if you leave that tree in the forest, it will burn down in a catastrophic wildfire. If you cut it down and you turn it into 2x4s and you put it in a house, guess what? That is sequestered in that house forever. Okay? So if you actually are concerned about carbon, this idea that we should be opposed to logging, de facto opposed to logging, like flat out, you have a conflict, because creating 2x4s actually is a good way to sequester that carbon, right? You're removing the tree from the forest, but you're still keeping that carbon in there, okay? Eventually, that tree is going to drop a whole bunch of litter. That's going to decompose. That's going to release carbon, CO2 into the environment, or it's going to burn down in a catastrophic wildfire. So either way, you're playing whack-a-mole trying to chase down this carbon. You might as well sequester it in the form of houses, okay? And we need houses. We can't have this thing where it's team plant just totally suppressing team human. It's pretty absurd. The funny thing that they did was they cited some research and totally misquoted it, right? So they cited some research that they claim says that the more dense your forests are, like the more biomass you have, the lower the fire risk. And then I read that study and it was absolutely untrue. It's completely untrue. So they're just making stuff up and they're misinterpreting data. So when they were saying that, like, the more biomass you actually have, they were actually they're trying to make the impression that if your forest floor is completely covered with fuels, that actually reduces your fire risk. What the study was actually saying is the biomass being huge, super dense trees, that biomass. And what they were referring to is these huge old growth forests that are super shaded with a dense canopy and huge trunks and nothing on the forest floor, no ladder fuels. So it's quite the opposite of what they're trying to say with it. So it's just full of distortions and BS, and it's so absurd. So again, look, I don't want to log this entire place into a moonscape. I certainly don't. But we have to have a sensible balance. We have to have a sensible balance with all of this stuff, because we still need humans to have homes, right? And we're going to need a lot of 2x4s. especially after Gavin Newsom's state park burned down the Palisades. Now, speaking of sensible policy as it pertains to timber, we have Doug Burgum.
The fuel load buildup that's occurred in American forests can actually go back to the Clinton era, which is there was a famous effort by the beginning of the environmental extremist movement that said, the spotted owl, we can't cut any more trees because of the spotted owl. And this was part of the weaponization of the Endangered Species Act. Right. And so by shutting down our forests, we killed our position in the timber milling position. We killed rural communities that were dependent on the timber industry. But the private sector folks, because if we would do a timber lease, they would write a check to the government, to do that lease. And an oil and gas lease, they pay us for the opportunity, and then they pay us a royalty on top of it. Right. So these are ongoing sustainable revenue. But then when they're in the forest, in the case of the forestry, they're clearing roads, they're doing the thinning, they're doing all the things to do to manage that forest. So then if there is a fire, it doesn't burn at the super mega heat fire that we have today. And
destroy all the forest and all the critters that live in it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not environmental.
A forest that's clean can survive a fire.
Yeah.
Because the healthy trees survive, and it can be positive. Controlled burns have a positive role, but these out of control mega fires, super hot fires, they do kill the forest. And now we are again we're burning more timber every year in America than we harvest. And we're importing accidentally. Right. I mean, so uncontrolled fires consume more of our asset base.
Right.
So then we spend money to try to control or stop those fires as opposed to get paid money from the private sector. We being the citizens, the public owner, we should be receiving revenue as opposed to expending expenses, fighting the fires. The amount of timber that we've stopped harvesting equals about the amount that we now import. So then we're also paying for imported timber. And if people do, it's completely crazy. And if we do care about CO2 releases, when it burns, these are massive CO2 releases. That's how you release the CO2 from a tree, is you burn it. I mean, when you have a campfire or a fire, you're releasing that carbon. And so the fires in California have released more CO2 than all of their efforts to control CO2.
Right. What a joke.
Damn, dude. How refreshing is that? Now, I don't know anything about Burgum. I'll be perfectly candid. And I don't care. Because like I always say, I feel like political tribalism has melted our brains. I don't know anything about him. I'm assuming that he's a Republican, just because typically you don't see Democrats talk like this. And for some reason, political tribalism has established that if we talk about removing fuels from the forest, or if we have a sensible policy on timber harvesting, you must be a right-wing Nazi. Okay, those are the rules. Just to touch on the chat, I love Phil Cunningham chimes in and says, but I was thinking maybe an opinion from a real wildfire scientist. Yeah, Phil, can you imagine that? Can you imagine actually listening to the real scientists? This is what's so frustrating. I feel like most of the media dialogue, in terms of like what the mainstream is consuming, they really do cherry pick their experts. And when I was reading that article from John Muir Society, what I was struck by is like, man, they are really cherry picking what bits of data they want. Because if you're going to go off and claim like, a lot of U.S. Forest Service foresters and scientists, they agree that, the more biomass you have, the smaller your fire. It's like, what? Literally never heard any forester ever say that, ever. Like in the history, like the last 100 years, never heard that. So it's kind of crazy. The Super Pav says the anti-soil scientist wildfire club. I love that. Yeah, our last Forest Service chief was a soil scientist. And he fucked up the agency to a degree that I don't think, it's literally beyond repair. They're now removing firefighting from the Forest Service. It's going to be a husk of its former self. Is Burgum the chief of the U.S. Forest Service? Is that his role? I think it is. Okay. Again, I don't care what his political background is. I like how he's talking. This is a very reasonable policy. It doesn't smell of political tribalism at all. There was that reference to Clinton, but whatever. Who cares? Clinton would be a Republican by today's standards anyway. But I like this, okay? And he pointed out something very important. Now, he pointed out two things. We're going to touch on one thing. He talked about the spotted owl. Now, where have we seen this before? Where have we seen issues with the spotted owl? LP is saying Bobby Garcia should be running the FS show. Dude, how many times have I said that? I agree wholeheartedly that Bobby Garcia, not only is he the best forest chief in the country, but he is absolutely the most well-positioned to run Fed Fire. Okay. I've lobbied for this very hard, and I hope this happens. Maybe I'll talk to Burgum. Maybe I'll talk to him personally and recommend Bobby. We'll see. So he mentioned the spotted owl. Where have we seen this before? Now, I addressed this in one of our previous Palisades Fire live streams dealing with the lawsuit. There was a letter, an email to a constituent, a resident in the Palisades, who was severely impacted by the fire there. And this is from Warren Sutton. He is the inspector of the brush clearance unit at the LA Fire Department. He was all on his own because Karen Bass's budget cuts removed everyone in his department. He said, this was the most important thing. When he was responding to a resident who was complaining about state or city-owned properties throughout the Palisades that did not clear their brush, and then they caught fire and burned down their homes. He said, some other info that you might be interested in is there are a lot of state-owned land surrounding you that never gets cleared. The state says it's the homeowner's responsibility to clear the state land, and the homeowner has to apply for and pay for a permit to clear their land. And I can't cite a homeowner to clear property that isn't theirs. So this land never gets cleared. Last fall, we had a lot of complaints on state property, which was near you. And for the first time ever, we spent city funds to clear a lot of this state land. This spring, we again cleared the state land on Los Leones, and then the California state parks had concerns about how much clearing our contractors were doing. They didn't want us to touch certain protected native trees and bushes, and didn't want us to clear within 50 feet of birds' nests. So then, when we cleared the state property, we were limited by the state on what we were allowed to clear. And it doesn't look anywhere near as clear as the state land in Los Leones does. So this is spotted owl nest. These are the spotted owl standards where you cannot clear within 50 feet of a potential nesting site. So as you can imagine, leaving a 50-foot radius of brush, that's a huge pocket of fuel that could easily spot. And if you're limited like that, then you're kind of screwed. So here it is, the spotted owl policy having a tangible impact directly on the Palisades. So this isn't some nebulous, Republican right-wing complaint that gets thrown out there as like, oh, the spotted owl and all these friends of groups. Like, this is actually a real problem. Okay, we need to reconcile this. We need a balance. So certainly we need to make some kind of exceptions where it's going to potentially threaten lives and property. Dude, I love owls. We have a whole parliament of owls here in my backyard. But man, come on, guys. We had 12 people die in this freaking thing. Now, what was the other thing that he talked about? What was the other thing that he talked about? This is going to tie in very importantly. He talked about how with all the efforts chasing CO2 and the whole cap and trade initiative that California does, I always refer to
the fuel load buildup that's occurred in America. And if people it's completely crazy. And if we do care about CO2 releases, when it burns, these are massive CO2 releases. That's how you release the CO2 from a tree, is you burn it. I mean, when you have a campfire or fire, you're releasing that carbon. And so the fires in California have released more CO2 than all of their efforts to control CO2.
The fires in California have released more CO2 than all their efforts to contain CO2. Now, what was I just talking about? If you burn it, that's not how you contain CO2. Best way to do it is cut down that tree, turn it into 2x4s, and put it in a home. And put it in a home that has a fuel break around it so it doesn't burn down. That's the best way to do it. Casey K says the spotted owl ruined the lumber industry in my area. Yeah, there's a lot of cases of this, man. We have to have a more sensible environmental policy. And this is me speaking as my typical barefoot, hippie, liberal California environmentalist self. So I am a bleeding heart when it comes to animals and nature, but I am a pragmatist when it comes to just the basic tautological reality that you obviously cannot care for any given plant or any animal if the entire place burns down. Okay, so clearly we need to strike a balance where our protections of the milk vetch plant or the spotted owl are not stopping us from doing the most basic fire mitigation policies. Now, I wanted to call attention to his statement on the carbon credits. This is gonna be very important. This is gonna be very, very important. Before we go down that rabbit hole, I just wanted to touch on, remember that fire, the 6.5 fire that burned through Chinese camp? This one that rolled through Chinese camp, and it was really sad because there's that one lady who was talking about how, it's a quiet little town, it's population 150. She's like, it's going to be even quieter now. That was really devastating. So Sue Thompson sent me some screenshots of basically comments underneath this story. Just a little update to this. The Lund family owned about 90% of the town in Chinese camp. and they never did any maintenance or brush clearing on any of it. I can't grow a weed in my yard taller than a foot without CAL FIRE sending me notifications about it. Why was the Lund family allowed to let this historic town become so overgrown? Someone needs to ask a few questions about this. I love that town, and I'm mad about it. Someone echoed, exactly my thoughts. I'm heartbroken that all of this history is gone, but I've been expecting it to burn for years. Very interesting. I watched all that brush grow all spring. No one cut it down this year. County didn't get on anyone either. I almost stopped with my tractor and cut brakes this spring around historic, but it was all posted. Mrs. Nicolini, who has passed away, used to pay someone to clear brush on Main Street. She was the Chinese camp historian and took great pride in the town. The owner of the properties never seemed interested in maintaining them and did not live in the area. Huh. A few of the townspeople wanted to buy some of them to restore, but the family wouldn't sell. The county isn't responsible for upkeep. You see this? Now, we talked about how they were not prepared to receive wildfire in this town, and it was totally overgrown. I didn't know that 90% of the town was owned by one family. We have a growing theme here. We have wealthy families refusing or simply neglecting to do their brush clearance, and then everybody else suffers. Is this how we're going to live? Now, this ties into what Burgum was saying about the carbon credits. Now, we've talked about Gavin. We talked about the Gav hands. You got to be concerned about the Gav hands. This reminds me of like my medical Qigong training. I trained as a holistic health practitioner, and he's like doing some Qigong stuff when he does that. He's got different things where he like butts the heel of his hand together, and then he does the grating Parmesan at Olive Garden move. Please don't Photoshop that clip of me. Now, remember last night when I talked about how I'm starting to get concerned that everything that we're pouring into prescribed fire is maybe a boondoggle. Maybe it's a big burndoggle, because I'm questioning where all this money is going, right? Remember what Gavin Newsom said on Sean Ryan?
Billions and billions of dollars. We've 10x'd our investments in that space, 10x'd it. From the day I got in, the first executive order I signed as governor of California was around vegetation and forest management. Waived CEQA again. Did an emergency order to fast track these efforts.
Now, of course, he lies about all this stuff. He lies. Like, he might be putting more money into it, but the work isn't getting done.
Unprecedented investments in this space. And he just demagogues them. We have a big federal fire on him.
You notice what he said? Unprecedented investments in this space. Investments. That doesn't mean the work's getting done. This gulf is what concerns me. He's 10x'd. He's 10x the amount of money that's going into it. Have we seen 10x the work getting done? Have we seen 2x? Have we seen a 30% increase? No, we haven't. So where's the money, Lebowski? Now, I asked this question last night, and I told you guys that I wanted to be proven wrong on this. I did not want to be right that this is money laundering. And I fully expected that someone was going to get back to me and show, no, here's where this is going. It just takes a while to spin up some burn bosses, yada, yada, yada. At the very least, I thought, okay, this is going to take a while, like dig into the financials, try to figure this out, see if there's any stuff that doesn't smell right. Well, it turns out I was dead wrong. Thanks to Super Pav, whose identity remains a mystery. Literally the first stone that we overturned, the first one, we find impropriety immediately. Are you guys ready to go down this rabbit hole? Okay. I'm going to share with you what Super Pav found. He found the California Sustainability Group. Now, get ready to hear, climate and sustainability and carbon and all this stuff. I wanted to preface the stream with this because, look, guys, I'm so sick of everybody constantly blaming carbon emissions for the fires. That's not the issue here. Carbon is not the control knob, at least not in the form of CO2. Carbon is only the control knob for fires in its form as plant matter, as fuel for the fire, okay? Now, California Sustainability Group is one of the recipients of some of this grant money that Gavin Newsom has 10x'd. They have a particular project here. And you might think, okay, this looks fine. This is Portola Hills. This is CAL FIRE wildfire prevention. And it looks like they're doing some fuel mitigation on the streets. Okay, that's interesting. Not around the edges here, a little bit on Ridgeline Road. But I want to show a little bit of this. Okay, let's look into this area, or on this organization, excuse me. Project funding. CAL FIRE's Wildfire Prevention Grants Program provides funding for wildfire prevention projects and activities in and near wildfire-threatened communities that focus on increasing the protection of people, structures, and communities. I like it. Funded activities include hazardous fuels reduction, wildfire prevention planning, and wildfire prevention education, with an emphasis on improving public health and safety while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Dude, again, what the fuck does CAL FIRE have to do with reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Why is this a priority? Everything about this was great until we got to the greenhouse gas thing. We need to separate this from wildfire. I'm sorry. And you're going to see why we need to separate this. Wildfire prevention grants are funded in whole or part by cap and trade auction proceeds appropriated by the California legislature to CAL FIRE, who's responsible for administering funds allocated from the CCI program. This is where it starts to go down a rabbit hole. You guys are going to have to pay attention, okay? Because this gets a little bit complex, but trust me, it's maddening. So what they're saying is, this is not taxpayer funds. This is by auctioning off cap and trade. Cap and trade is where we section off areas of California forest, where in this climate cult, and it is a religious cult, they have, just like any other religious cult, they have indulgences. They sell indulgences. So they're not going to block you from emitting carbon. They're just going to say, well, you can continue to sin. You just have to buy an indulgence. So you have to pay us to like adopt a section of the forest, and that forest is a carbon offset. Now, forget the fact that that forest is already there. It's not like they just planted a tree, right? And are sequestering a new, they have a new like carbon sequestration thing. No, they're just putting their name and buying an indulgence on a plot that already exists. The irony is that I think like 90% of these cap and trade forests have burned up in wildfires because Gavin Newsom is such a moron. So it's like, what are we talking about? Like, what did Bergen just talk about? It all just burns up anyway. Even their cap and trade forests are burning up. The fire-adapted Portola Hills project is part of California climate investments. Climate investments, not wildfire, climate. A statewide initiative that puts billions of cap and trade dollars to work, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, strengthening the economy, and improving public health and the environment, particularly in disadvantaged communities. Remember this line. So what they're saying is these are cap and trade dollars, not taxpayer dollars. Okay, so you think, well, this is money that's coming from polluters. This is a good thing. We're cycling in good money, right? We are disincentivizing heavy pollution and polluters by taking some of their money, and then we are trading it and investing in these CAL FIRE programs, particularly in disadvantaged communities. Remember that. The Orange County Fire Safe Council, CAR, Community Hardening Phase 1 project, is part of California Climate Investments, a statewide initiative that puts billions of cap and trade dollars to work reducing greenhouse gas and improving public health and the environment, particularly in disadvantaged communities. It's so nice they say it twice. Now, here is the actual project. This is their CEQA exemption that they have to file. Bethany Ross, who's running the California Sustainability Group. She's the president. She is taking charge of the fire-adapted Portola Hills project. Lawrence Slope. Interesting. The Lawrence Brothers estate proposes to remove 451 Mexican fan palms and 46 pine trees to reduce the fuel load and protect 2,192 homes within the adjacent Portola Hills neighborhood. The hazardous fuels will be removed from the perimeter slope to meet Orange County Fire and California Department of Protection standards for defensible space. Okay. So now we talked about how this is all for disadvantaged communities. You guys know where Portola Hills is? Does Portola Hills stand out as a disadvantaged community. This is Portola Hills, right? We saw the map for this project here. So let's take a look at some of these areas where they're going to be reducing the risk. 1.16 million, 1.5 million. Let's look in here. $900,000, 1.25 million. My goodness, dude. Does this look like a disadvantaged community where homes are being sold for over $1 million, 1.5 mil? Oh, there's a video. That is a $1.5 million home. Are you serious? That can't be true. Let's look at some of these pictures. Oh yeah, this looks like a disadvantaged home. 100%. This is a disadvantaged community. So now, where are these climate credits coming from? Where are they coming from? Does anybody know? What they will tell you is that these are coming from polluters. So we imagine some like Monty Burns style, horrible corporation that's just dumping barrels of toxic sludge into the Kern River, and we're taxing them, right? Turns out you are paying for this. Do you know how? It's on your bill, on your power bill. Do you know who they're charging? They're charging you. When you look at, for example, SoCal Edison energy bill, you have a few things on here. You guys see that? They have like the wildfire fund. Here, the wildfire fund charge. So they're charging you, the wildfire fund. They're charging you because they are going to kill a certain amount of people every year with their shitty equipment and their failure to shut off power during dangerous wind events. They know that they're going to kill a bunch of people and destroy a bunch of property. So they're going to preemptively charge you to pay them off. So there's already that. Then what else do we have? What else do they have? They have, as a part of your bill, I'm going to see if I can find this. They actually charge you extra. It's actually buried in the rates. So you don't see it. It's in the rate. Okay. So your energy, these charges here, what's buried in that rate. Let's see, you got transmission charges, distribution charges, public purchase programs, new system generation change, power charge differences and franchise fees. There's also the carbon offset fee. Okay. This is incorporated into your bill. Now, what they do is they give some of this money back in the form of a grant. Okay. This October, your utility bill will include an $86 credit identified as the California Climate Credit. Your household and millions of others throughout the state will receive a similar credit on their utility bill. The California Climate Credit is a direct result of the state's nation-leading cap and trade program that requires polluters to pay for climate pollution. Credits are distributed in April and October each year. Credits appear automatically on your bill and are designed to help utility customers during the transition to a more sustainable future. Since 2014, residential households have already received an average of $892 in California climate credits on their electric utility bills, totaling more than $10 billion in cap and trade program cumulative benefits statewide. So look at how they're dressing this up. Oh, the cap and trade system, it's paying you. We're giving you money back twice a year. We're giving you back $86. Isn't that awesome? This is your cap and trade program at work, guys. What they don't tell you is they've been charging you. A part of your bill is going to buy chunks of that forest that all gets burned up anyway in that cap and trade stand up in Northern California. Because when they talk about polluters, they're talking about themselves. Southern California Edison and PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric are the primary payers of the cap and trade fees. They're the ones paying into this. Do you understand that? So they work that into your bill, and then they give you back a small portion of that and call it a credit. So it makes you feel like, anywhere in here, do they tell you that they've been charging you for this? And you've probably paid thousands of dollars into this cap and trade bullshit program where you're buying up existing trees in Northern California that all get burned up. And then they give you back a tiny sliver of that and then make it see, it's like credit card points. You know, they're eating you alive on interest, right? And then they give you back $12 in points. And then you feel like, oh man, I'm coming out ahead. It's all, dude, see how they're laundering this? And then this is where like the cap and trade stuff is coming from. It's coming from you as a ratepayer, okay? The primary payers into this cap and trade program are these utility companies. They are the ones providing this money. And then they give you back a tiny portion, don't tell you where it came from. So it feels like, oh, this is a great program. I'm getting free money. And then that is what's going to fund these projects, including the Lawrence estate, where we've got 451 Mexican fan palms and 46 pine trees to reduce the fuel load and protect 2192 homes. The Lawrence brothers estate. Who are the Lawrence brothers? That's a lot of Mexican fan palms. So why is it that Southern California Edison ratepayers are paying to remove 451 Mexican fan palms from the Lawrence estate? Is this like a public property? Typically, we don't refer to public properties as estates. What's the Lawrence estate? Who knows? Who knows? I'm going to check the chat here. Phil Cunningham says, dude, Monty Burns had a nuclear plant. That's clean energy. That's a really good point. He's an environmentalist. I don't know why people in California are so opposed to nuclear. I feel like that would be a good solution. Now, out here in Tennessee, we have tons of hydroelectric. That's sort of what the Tennessee Valley Authority is famous for, is if you remember, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? When they just flooded the valley. So I live on a lake it's dammed. It's the Old Hickory Lake, beautiful lake. We love the place. It's where Dolly Parton lives. And we generate so much electricity from that dam that Tennessee, blood red Tennessee, is way greener than California. We have tons of clean energy because it's like 60 to 70% hydroelectric, and then the rest is nuclear. So we're like zero emission energy in Tennessee. So the irony with all the virtue signaling in California and Tennessee, blood red Tennessee is still doing better. So now we've got your money as a ratepayer is being laundered into the cap and trade forest that gets burned up anyway, right? So it's a fake carbon offset program. And then that money gets filtered down into a fake carbon credit on your tax bill, where they pay you back a tiny portion of what you already paid. And then the rest is going to fund the California Sustainability Group to run a fuel reduction project on the Lawrence brothers estate. Now, who are the Lawrences? Steve Kerrigan, of course he knows this because he knows this area very well. The Lawrence estate is quite beautiful. They have a zoo-like place there. I went to a wedding there, 12-piece band, ballet, 6-figure wedding. They used to own a brewery in Anaheim too, sold it, now Radiant Brewery. This doesn't sound like public property. A 6-figure wedding at the Lawrence estate? Huh. Now, I've been to the Lawrence estate. I actually filmed an event there. It is staggeringly beautiful. Now, what is the Lawrence estate and who are the Lawrences? Well, they were featured. Tigers, revelers, generations of family call Rancho home. This is Rancho Las Lomas. That's the name of the estate. And you know that if your home has a name, you're fucking loaded. Now, this is the matriarch of the family, and this is the son, Brett, who inherited this property, this beautiful property. Now, what does Brett want to do with the place? In this article, he says, I want to do a hotel. I want to do a restaurant. I want to do a brewery. I want to do a wine tasting room. I want to do a spa. Hoping to offer wine tasting in the historic barn and a brewery near the ranch entrance. Huh. So why is it that SoCal Edison is charging you extra, laundering that money through a cap and trade program, and then using that money on this person's estate? This guy seems like a very ambitious entrepreneur who was born into a ton of money. But maybe I'm wrong. So let's look at his social media. Maybe that'll give us some clues. He's got a nice full head of hair. That follicular density, that screams privilege, man. That's a stress-free life right there. I'm jealous, dude. You look at his feed. Oh, look, he's hanging out with the Dalai Lama. He's got tigers. He's traveling quite a bit. What else we got going on here? Oh, lots of international travel. He's got a PJ, drinking. He's wintering. He's taking his PJ out to go winter in Vail. Interesting. This dude needs your money to clear some palm trees off of his estate. Oh, here he is sailing a yacht in Italy. I wish I could afford a yacht in Italy. Man, he must really need your money. Really badly. Here's him during COVID, 2020. Quarantine ain't so bad, as he shows a picture of his luxurious estate. How does that make you feel? How were the COVID lockdowns for you, you peasant? Did you get to look out on this like 2,000 acre estate with your exotic animals and multiple houses and your meditation fountain? Here he is mocking all of the people who had to suffer through the government shutdowns. Someone like me, dude, I lost like $300,000 because the city of LA decided I wasn't allowed to film a commercial, even though every single person in my crew was willing, able, ready to work. None of us were worried about COVID, but they shut down the studio, so we weren't allowed to work. We lost a ton of money, and it still hurts me to this day. I'm glad that for Brett, it wasn't so bad. Because for a lot of us, it was pretty fucking bad having the government shut down everything. So now, why does he need your money to cut down these trees? Do you guys see what's going on here? Casey K says he probably makes big political donations. That's to say the least. Less money spent on clearing trees is more money he can give to politicians' re-election funds. Why aren't they just doing the clearing themselves? Why aren't they doing it themselves? That's the question. And what is with all of this laundering of money? Why is SoCal Edison disguising where your money's going? Why are they not disclosing that you are paying higher rates because they're putting a percentage, like this always happens. They push their fees onto you, always. So when they get sued for killing a bunch of people, they pass it on to the ratepayer. And they're doing this with the whole cap and trade whack-a-mole game that California plays with these fake indulgences. Now, why do they do this? Why do they do this? It's to create an incentive. The process of increasing utility rates and then issuing a climate credit, why are they paying you back for it? I want you to read this. The process of increasing utility rates and then issuing a climate credit serves a specific purpose under California's cap and trade system. Instead of simply lowering rates, this two-step approach, that's a generous euphemism for money laundering, okay? When you are disguising the source of funds, that's money laundering. This two-step approach is intended to create a market-based incentive for both utilities and consumers to reduce their carbon footprint. So they're laundering this money and they're hiding it from you just to try to commandeer your brain and make a psychological impact. That's literally what they're saying. The price signal for conservation. First, utilities pass the cost of purchasing carbon credits directly to consumers through higher rates. This creates a clear economic signal for ratepayers. The more energy you use, the more you pay for the environmental impact. This incentivizes you to conserve energy, improving your home's energy efficiency, or investing in cleaner alternatives like rooftop solar. If rates were simply lowered across the board, the financial incentive for individual conservation would be significantly reduced. So they're trying to psychologically manipulate you. By charging you more, they're trying to make life in California that much more painful to try to control your behavior. The investment signal for utilities. The cap and trade program is designed to drive the entire energy market toward cleaner sources. By making it more expensive to generate electricity from fossil fuels, the system encourages utilities to invest in more renewable energy. As utilities transition to cleaner generation, they will need to purchase fewer carbon credits, and those savings will eventually be reflected in lower rates over the long term. The climate credit is a dividend. The money collected from the auction of carbon credits is returned to households through the California Climate Credit. That's money laundering. Acting as a dividend, this helps to offset the increased energy costs for ratepayers, particularly low-income households, without eliminating the price incentive to reduce consumption. According to Citizens Climate Lobby, roughly 2/3 of Americans would receive more from a carbon-free dividend than they would pay in higher prices, depending on their consumption. Now, do you see how this works? This is funneling money from poor people and supporting the coffers of rich people, right? If you are charging all ratepayers more money, and then they're just doing this performative like credit where they're paying you back just this tiny portion, ultimately, who is getting fucked by this? Who's getting fucked by this? It's lower income people, of course. It's working class and lower income people. You remember what we talked about earlier? What they were claiming this is for? This whole system is for particularly disadvantaged communities. So yeah, they're doing their fuel reduction work in an area where the median home is like $1 million. That's not a disadvantaged community. And where's the money coming from? Well, they say that it's coming from auctioning off the climate credits that we've so dutifully stored. But who's paying for those climate credits? It's the ratepayers. So of course, it's the disadvantaged people, the disadvantaged communities who are getting fucked. So the SoCal Edison customer who lives in an apartment building in Van Nuys, who has no wildfire threat whatsoever, they are paying into the wildfire recovery fund for when SoCal Edison burns up a whole bunch of people. So they're paying for that, even though wildfire is never going to touch them, right? Then they're also paying into this cap and trade money laundering scheme. And then that money is being laundered over to pay for these rich people's property. So this guy who is enjoying quarantine in his luxurious estate can have all of his dangerous fuels that are threatening his buildings removed. Do you see how this works? SuperPav says Cal Fire needs to fix up their grant awarding scheme. It is a scheme, and they absolutely do need to fix it. Now, on this note of social equity, a mandatory 35% of the GGRF revenue must be directed to projects that benefit disadvantaged and low-income communities and households, which often disproportionately bear the burden of pollution. Really? Like we don't all breathe the same air? Dude, what is this commie gobbledygook? Projects funded by the GGRF include clean transportation options in underserved communities and affordable housing near job centers. The climate credit as a buffer. The climate credit serves to offset some of the increased energy costs for ratepayers due to the cap and trade program, right? So they're admitting that they increase the rates to punish you for cap and trade. It acts as a dividend, returning a portion of the revenue collected to consumers. Residential and small business customers typically receive the credit twice a year. Transparency and behavioral economics. Do you see that euphemism they use? Behavioral economics. This is like information warfare. This is psychological warfare. The separate listing of the climate credit on bills makes the impact of the climate policy more visible to consumers. It is all psychological manipulation. They're trying to cover their money laundering. While the rates increase due to the cost of carbon, the credit acts as a rebate. Potentially influencing consumer behavior towards more efficient energy use without completely negating the financial signal of higher energy costs. It is all meant to manipulate you psychologically while disguising this money laundering operation where they are extracting money from low income and middle income consumers who live in apartment complexes well outside of any fire zone. And that money gets laundered through this cap and trade bullshit. And then it's going to the Lawrence estate. These people are not hurting for money. He does not need your rates to be higher to pay for hiring an arborist to get rid of his flammable palm trees. Maybe the dude can skip one PJ trip to Aspen and spend that money cutting it down himself. Maybe. Now, I don't want to pile on this guy. He might be a totally fine guy. The problem is the system. This system is fucking crazy. Casey K says, at least my small community gets some grant money to pay for our slash program. The thing is, just like I can't just shit on this dude. Maybe he's a good guy, right? I don't want to shit all over him. I just find it so bizarre that like this is how we're laundering money for this stuff. I knew there was tomfoolery here. But like we said with like Napa Firewise, it is a legit group. They're doing outstanding work. I like it. I like what they're doing. I have no problem with them getting money. And like Zeke Lunder's group up in Butte, love them. Okay, so let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater, but literally the first stone that we overturned, we find this bullshit. Where Southern California Edison and PG&E and San Diego Gas and Electric are increasing your rates. So that way they can launder this money to this grant program through cap and trade. My goodness, guys. All right. That's just me. That's all I got. You know, I made this this meme earlier because Elon's always fantasizing about going to Mars. Whenever I make memes like this, or I comment on like, why are we wasting time going to Mars? We have so much work to do here. People get really pissed. Like I have people who will like violently unfollow me and then block me and call me, you know, like a disgusting mudfootism. What's mudfootism? Like, what is that? Is that like the internet version of a Luddite? Look, man, Elon can do whatever he wants with his money. But when he talks about how he's like trying to help humanity by going to Mars, can we just be honest about what this is? It's just nerd vanity. Like, I think going to Mars is cool. I think it's really cool. I would love to go to Mars, but I don't have any illusions that this is somehow helping humanity. Let's be honest. We've got so much work to do. The idea, like, I would never conceive of pursuing some kind of a vanity adventure that's not going to serve humanity in any way, shape, or form. Don't lie to me that like, oh, well, maybe we'll discover some tech. We don't need new technology. We've got enough technology. We've got too much fucking technology. We need to clear some fucking brush. We need to keep our cities on Earth from burning to the ground and people dying in their homes with something that can be prevented with a chainsaw. We don't need a rocket ship. Okay? So I always get pissed when I see all this money and all this nerd fanfare going to an uninhabitable space rock when we have this perfect Earth that God made just for us, and we are not being good stewards of it. And we're going to watch 12 senior citizens burn alive in the Palisades, all because we couldn't marshal enough resources to just get some paisas out there on the hill with some chainsaws and get rid of some goddamn plants. It pisses me off. But for some reason, whenever I mention this, it really triggers a lot of people. Am I the bad guy? I feel like I need to put this in that Reddit. God knows I would never go on Reddit because it's just a hellhole of the worst people on the planet. But they have like a subreddit I've seen that's Am I the Asshole? So this is a little gut check for me. I'm going to ask you guys, am I the asshole with this meme? Steve Kerrigan says, we did a grant directly across the street from Lawrence. The HOA did not maintain their acacia. Grant was $500,000. Our small area got half. Santiago Estates got the other half to trim acacia on $1.2 million houses. They wanted it done by hand. We said no. Yeah, dude, those people with those $1 million houses, they're going to make demands. I love how they think they can just order you around like you're their servant just because your salary is funded by the taxpayers. Phil Cunningham, the cunning Phil Cunningham says, Marin County doing good stuff too. I have heard that. I have heard that Marin. See, what do you notice? Marin and Napa, good stuff getting done. These are interesting communities where you actually have very wealthy people who happen to be pretty salt of the earth people as well, right? Pretty salt of the earth people. And so they kind of just, I've found that with certain like self-made wealthy people, they are very pragmatic about a lot of things. They're like, hey, get it done, right? Rick Caruso was like that in Palisades. Very pragmatic guy, you know, not very aloof. For some reason, it's that inherited money where they're just really aloof and they don't seem to understand. I've always found that like the self-made millionaires, they tend to be a lot more pragmatic and they pay to get this stuff done. Casey K says, Mars may not look bad after the next super calders erupts or large asteroid hits the Earth. That's not fair. That's not fair. We can't have some like Michael Bay fantasy about the end of Earth. Like, do you want to live on Mars? Do you want that life where you're just in a bubble on an uninhabitable rock? I had that same, I remember my grandma during COVID. She refused to stop going to the farmer's market. She wanted to keep going to the farmer's market in Santa Monica. She refused to wear a mask. She refused to not see her family. And everyone was so panicked. She's still alive, by the way. Everyone was so panicked that she's going to get COVID and she was going to die. But she's like, I don't care if this is not living, right? If surviving this means I don't get to see my great grandkids and I don't get to go outside and get fresh air and go get some fruit at the farmer's market, kill me. I don't want to be alive. I feel the same way about Mars. I would love to go just to like experience it. But I mean, can we be honest? Are any of our lives better because someone walked on the moon? Like, honestly, really? Measurably better? I think it's super cool. Don't get me wrong. In the same way, I think it was really cool when Kirk Gibson hit the game-winning home run in Game 1 of the '88 World Series. But are any of our lives measurably better? I was at that game. Is my life better because of that? No, doesn't matter. It's just a thing that happened, right? And when it comes to Mars, I feel like we'd just be living in this bubble. And we'd have to be like drinking our own poop water that's been filtered through some weird, robo filtration system. And it's like, we'd have to mentally get over that. And in order to live on Mars, see, Phil says, I would rather get hit by the asteroid than go to Mars. Exactly. If that's living, I don't want to live. Like, I like waterfalls. I like trees. I like our lake. I like experiencing this stuff. So it's not enough for me to just survive. I don't want to survive in a bunker. I'd rather have the apocalypse take me out, Maybe I'm wired differently, but clearly some people agree with me. But everything that you would need to survive on Mars, you'd have to bring from Earth, because Mars doesn't have any of the ingredients that we need. I don't think people appreciate just how special Earth is. Like, it's such a cliche for people to say, like, well, the odds are there's so many planets out there. Some of them have to have intelligent life. I actually don't think the odds are really that good when you think of just how crazy the perfect balance we have here, right? That perfect distance from the sun, the perfect composition of elements. Like, we grew out of that. We are simply a byproduct of this specific place. So the idea that there's another place where we can survive or should survive, I think it's crazy. And if you even take a theological point of view and you believe that God actually made Earth for us, it's blasphemy to abandon it for something else. Like, God's creation isn't good enough for us? Come on, give me a break. Am I bagging on Velcro? Yes, I'm bagging on Velcro. Do you guys know how Velcro was invented, by the way? It was invented by accident. Who knows how? Who knows how? Well, I'm gonna leave that question. Think cowboys. Think cowboys. But Velcro was invented on accident, the same way cheese was invented on accident. So that'll be your homework for the weekend, guys. You have to tell me, how was Velcro invented? Was it an accident like cheese? Does anyone know how cheese was invented? It's a Bedouin tribesman who was crossing the desert, and he had a sheep's stomach holding milk as a gourd. And in the heat and all that time crossing the desert, that milk had turned into cheese inside that stomach. And he ate it, and it was delicious. That's how we have cheese. Pretty gross, right? Not as gross as drinking your own poop water on Mars. So Casey, you might enjoy drinking that poo water. It ain't for me. It ain't for me. That might work for the robots, but it ain't going to work for this human. Remember, guys, as you head into the weekend, the only way to prove that you're human in this dystopian world of AI and Mars poop water is to do it live on Earth.